Welcome back to Intelligent Investment Today, the podcast concerned with all things value investment. In each episode, we take a look at a different subject and see how the principles, as laid down by the man widely considered to be the father of the craft, Benjamin Graham, can be used to shed light on the problem at hand. In today's episode, we consider the weighty subject of global economic depressions. We'll look at previous slumps and ponder how likely it is we'll see another event on the magnitude of the Great Depression of the 1920s and 30s in our lifetimes. So without further ado, buckle up, kick back and get ready for another lesson in the art of value investment as inspired by Benjamin Graham. Before we crack on with today's episode, I want to first clearly define what it is we're talking about here today. In this edition, we're not here to talk about the regular economic recessions or crises that crop up from time to time. We're here to consider the really big one, the one that wiped out virtually every investor on the planet, regardless of their investment style or ability. We are talking, of course, about the Great Depression that began in late 1929 and ran through to around 1941. It was to be the longest and deepest economic downturn in the history of the modern industrialised economy. No subsequent global recessions have come close to its magnitude or duration, with the Dow Jones Index alone losing almost 90% of its value from peak to trough. So what we are here today to consider is whether this was a one-off event, never to be repeated, or if it is the case of when and not if we'll suffer a replay of the catastrophic events of the 1930s. The first thing to say is that we're not going to be able to comprehensively examine the many causes of the Great Depression in a shortcast format like this, but we can still serve up a takeaway that I hope will inspire further homework at your end. We do have time to talk about the Great Depression in more general terms, however, and it is my view the myriad of causes is not actually the most important thing here. The critical thing to ask is, given a replay of the events that led up to the crash, do we have a financial system in place that is capable of dealing with the ensuing financial instability? For the real tragedy of the Great Depression was not in its lead-up, but in the fact that the big financial institutions of the time were unable or unwilling to do anything about it. Back in that period, we had only really two world powers of financial significance, Great Britain and the United States. However, Great Britain's financial dominance had been left devastated after the financial burdens of the First World War, leaving the United States as the only country left with the financial firepower to underwrite and stabilise the global economy. However, the Federal Reserve was not prepared to take on this role. Their failure to step up and increase the supply of money led to deflation, increasing debt and unemployment, ultimately leading to bank failures. The downturn could have almost certainly been nipped in the bud early on, but Great Britain's inability and the United States' unwillingness to stabilise the situation led to a situation that imploded. The situation was proof, if proof was needed, that the global economic system requires its biggest actor, in this example the United States of America, to take one for the team at times of global financial calamity. To give credit where credit is due, the United States learned the lesson pretty quickly, but not in time to stymie the runaway events of the Great Depression. In subsequent years, the US took on the mantle of being the economic stabiliser of last resort, being as they were the only country financially strong enough to be able to perform this role. And of course, economic crises similar to those faced by the global economy in 1929 did crop up from time to time, but each time the United States took early action to right the ship, resulting in downturns of much less magnitude and duration. Without this action, it is likely that some of these events could very well have spiralled out of control. Thanks to the US's actions as underwriter for the global economy, we have seen off shocks as big as the COVID pandemic and the banking crisis, without too much turbulence on global markets. But this leaves us to ponder whether the US will always be there to restore balance in times of crisis. On the one hand, the presumption must be that they have no real choice in the matter, given that they cannot somehow isolate themselves from what's going on in the wider world. But in the past few months, we've had to rethink a lot of things we had assumed as a given. Given this is a politics-free podcast, I'm not going to get into the rights and wrongs of shifting US foreign policy, other than to say that it is a reality that the current president has run on an American first platform, a policy that generally involves a focus on domestic policy while eschewing more global issues. It is a fact that Woodrow Wilson, Warren Harding and Calvin Coolidge, the three presidents in the hot seat in the immediate decade leading up to the crash of 1929, were also strong proponents of the America First policy, with Wilson himself being credited first coining the phrase in 1916. The policy was then, first and foremost, a means to prevent the US becoming embroiled in the deteriorating situation that led up to the First World War in Europe. But with its withdrawal from global politics also came a United States unwilling to play the role of global financial stabiliser of last resort. It is of course true that we don't know how much of the current administration's statements and intents are simply rhetoric designed to create leverage, or whether they truly do intend to tread an isolationist path. But either way, it's not too hard to imagine a US reluctance to step up to the plate in seeking to stabilise a financial crisis that crops up in Europe, say. And we all know that economic shocks do not stay local for long. Americans might rightfully ask why it is their job to prop up the rest of the world, but if not the US, then who? Today we have a second economic superpower in China, of course. But they have not up to this point shown any propensity to want to take responsibility for stabilising global markets. The opposite probably being true, in that they have been, up to now, quite a destabilising force. We do nowadays have the World Bank and the IMF, of course, who have been set up to act as a global central bank of sorts, but it is unlikely that either could cope in the event of a major contagion in the markets. The IMF struggled, for instance, to step up to bail out small economies like Ireland, Greece and Argentina, so it is highly unlikely they would be able to help out in the event that a large economy should suffer serious strife. But what we can say for certain is without someone willing or able to provide the service of global central bank of last resort, struggling countries and regions may find it impossible in their hour of need to find issuers of the loans that can stabilise their markets. And this contagion will then likely spread from country to country and could ultimately take the whole system down with it, exactly like it did in 1929. So if we can conclude that the main reason the financial crisis spiralled out of control was that nobody was willing or able to perform the role of being a global bank of last resort, and if we were to say that there are question marks around the US's willingness to perform this role in the future, then should we be losing sleep as value investors? And what, if anything, can we do to mitigate the risks? Even the great Benjamin Graham suffered hugely during the Great Depression, with his funds losing around 70% of their value. But it is also a period he credits with learning the most from. Ultimately, a recession of the magnitude and duration of the Great Depression is not something anyone is getting away with scot-free. But unless we all adopt the policy of permanently buying and holding gold, which will kill you for the rest of the time, it seems we just have to live with the fact and prepare mentally the best we can. The margin of safety will help a bit, but if stocks are tumbling by 80%, then not completely. So what else can we take from Graham's teachings on this score? Graham did learn two extremely important lessons from the calamity of the era that we can take heart from. First, he learned not to borrow money to invest. Graham had borrowed nearly $2 million going into the crisis, leaving him not only with paper losses, but very real debts. He also learned, and this is an important one, to live a lifestyle that could be maintained under almost any financial conditions. Prior to the financial crash, he was very much living the high life, with fancy homes, cars and numerous personal staff to take care of his every need. The crash meant a sudden end to the lifestyle to which he'd become accustomed. However, once he made back his fortune, he never slipped back into his former lavish ways, always living frugally, so no matter how his stocks performed, he would not suffer the hardships like he had during the Great Depression. To conclude, we can say that since the Great Depression, the United States has done a remarkable job in ensuring worldwide economic stability. It has, of course, not just saved the bacon of the rest of the world, but has been one of the main reasons they are still the dominant world power. Economic malaise is catching, and just like a pathogen, it does not respect borders. And because it is so much in the interests of the US to maintain global stability, I expect that their support will continue into the future, even if they become more isolationist in other ways. There is not a great deal an investor can do to mitigate the effects of a really significant global market meltdown of a similar scale to the Great Depression. Everyone loses, but they can learn from Graham's mistakes and ensure that they are not using borrowed money that will magnify any losses, as well as living a modest lifestyle that even a Great Depression cannot take away. And that is all for today's podcast. I do hope you have enjoyed it, and it hasn't depressed you too much. I will try and make the next one a little more upbeat, I promise. If you've enjoyed it, please do consider adding to playlists. That way you'll be alerted whenever a new episode drops. Also, please do spread the words to friends and family you may feel may also enjoy the show. I'm David Coombs. This has been Intelligent Investment Today. Until next time, stay safe and happy investing.